He grabbed her by the collar and slammed her back against the helicopter wall, so hard her skull bounced off metal. Petty Officer Danny Holt, 6'2", 220 pounds of Navy SEAL, held Lieutenant Emily Carter pinned like she was nothing. His spit hit her face when he talked. "Listen to me real good, sweetheart. You are cargo. You are a Band-Aid with legs. When we step off this bird, you sit in the dirt, you keep your mouth shut, and you pray to God none of us gets hurt, because honestly, I don't even trust you to do that right." He released her collar and shoved her sideways into the seat. 2 SEALs laughed. 1 clapped. Commander Walker saw everything from the front of the cabin. He turned back around and said nothing. Emily wiped the spit off her cheek with the back of her hand. Her fingers were trembling. Not from fear, from the effort it took to keep the monster inside her locked in its cage. Because if these men knew what she really was, if they knew what she'd done, what she could do, Danny Holt would never have put his hands on her. If this story grips you, I'm asking you for one thing. Subscribe to this channel and stay with Emily's journey until the very last word. And leave me a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far across the world this story reaches. The Chinook was 40 minutes out from the drop zone when Danny Holt decided Emily Carter needed another lesson. He'd been drinking coffee from a thermos, watching her organize her medical kit in the dim red glow of the cabin lights. Something about the way she moved bothered him. Too calm, too precise, like she'd done this 1,000 times before. And that irritated him because in his mind, she hadn't earned the right to look comfortable on his helicopter. "Hey, nurse." Emily didn't look up. She was counting hemostatic gauze packs. 12. She needed 20 for a unit this size, but 12 was what they gave her. "I'm talking to you." She looked up. Holt grinned. "Tell me something. When you were in medic school, did they teach you what it sounds like when a man's lung collapses? Not from a textbook. I mean the real sound. That wet, sucking noise, like somebody put a straw in a milkshake and forgot to stop. You ever hear that?" "Yes." "Where?" "Kandahar, 2019. Holt's grin flickered, just for a second. Then he recovered. "Kandahar, right. Probably at a field hospital behind 3 walls of concrete and a mile of barbed wire." Emily zipped her medical bag. "Something like that." Senior Chief Ramos, the oldest operator on the team, watched the exchange from across the cabin. 17 years in special operations had taught him to read people the way most men read road signs. Quick, automatic. And something about Emily Carter didn't match. The way she packed her kit, the way she positioned her body even sitting down, angled toward the door, weight balanced, hands free. That wasn't medic training. That was something else. He filed it away and said nothing. Commander Walker stood up from the cockpit area and faced the cabin. His voice cut through the engine noise like a blade. "Final brief. Intel puts 4 to 6 lightly armed hostiles at the compound. We breach northwest wall, clear room by room, extract the asset. Whole thing should take 11 minutes. Medic stays at the rally point 200 meters south. If we take casualties, we bring them to her. She does not come to us. Clear?" 11 voices answered. "Clear." Walker pointed at Emily. "Carter, what's your job tonight?" "Stay at the rally point. Treat casualties. Stay off the radio unless it's life or death." "And what don't you do?" "I don't enter the compound. I don't engage hostiles. I don't touch a weapon." "Good. Keep it that way." Walker sat back down. Holt leaned over to the operator beside him, a quiet Texan named Briggs, and said loud enough for the whole cabin, "Think she'll piss herself before or after the first explosion?" Briggs didn't laugh. He just stared straight ahead and said, "Leave it alone, Danny." "What? I'm just making conversation." "No, you're not. You're being an ass." Holt's face hardened. He didn't like being checked, especially not in front of the new girl. He shot a look at Emily. She was staring at the floor, hands still, face blank. He took that as victory. He was wrong. Emily Carter was not staring at the floor because she was ashamed. She was staring at the floor because she was remembering. 2 years, 7 months, 13 days since the review board stripped her of everything that mattered. She could still hear Colonel Mercer's voice, could still smell the coffee on his desk, could still see the way he folded his hands like a man about to deliver a death sentence. Staff Sergeant Carter, this board finds that your actions on Operation Nightfall, specifically the unauthorized discharge of your weapon, resulting in the death of a hostile combatant, constitute a violation of the rules of engagement as defined under. Emily had stopped listening after unauthorized. She already knew the rest. She'd replayed it in her head every night for 2 years. The hostage's name was David Corin, Israeli intelligence officer, captured during a cross-border operation and held in a concrete basement by fighters who had already uploaded 2 execution videos that week. Emily's Ranger team had been tasked with the rescue. The plan was to breach the building at 0300, clear the upper floors, negotiate access to the basement if possible, and extract Corin alive. But plans don't survive contact with reality. At 0247, 13 minutes before the scheduled breach, Emily was in overwatch position 400 meters south with a scoped rifle and a clear line of sight into the basement through a half-broken window. And she saw something the mission planners never accounted for. A man in a black hood walked into the basement carrying a machete. He grabbed David Corin by the hair and pulled his head back, exposing his throat. He looked up at a camera mounted on the wall. He was going to film it. He was going to cut this man's head off and broadcast it to the world. And he was going to do it 13 minutes before anyone was supposed to move. Emily keyed her radio. Overwatch to command. Hostile is preparing to execute the hostage, requesting permission to engage. Immediate. Static. Command, do you copy? Hostile is about to execute. I have a clear shot. Requesting permission to engage. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. 7 seconds. The man raised the machete. Command, respond now or this man dies. Nothing. Emily Carter made her choice. She steadied her breathing. She aligned her crosshairs on the center of the man's chest, and she squeezed the trigger. The round traveled 400 meters in less than half a second. It punched through the half-broken window and hit the man exactly where she aimed. He dropped the machete. He dropped to the floor. He never moved again. David Corin lived. Emily Carter's career died. Colonel Mercer had laid it out for her in that gray room with the buzzing lights. You fired without authorization. You broke the ROE. The fact that the hostage survived does not change the fact that you acted unilaterally and outside the mission parameters. You made a decision that was not yours to make. Emily had looked him dead in the eyes. Sir, if I hadn't pulled that trigger, David Corin would be a headless corpse on a propaganda video right now. His wife would be a widow. His 2 daughters would be fatherless. I had a shot. Nobody was answering the radio, so I took it. That's exactly the problem, Carter. You took it. You didn't have authority. I had a moral obligation. Mercer slammed his palm on the desk, not in anger, in frustration, because he knew she was right and it didn't matter. Moral obligation doesn't show up in the UCMJ, Staff Sergeant. What shows up is insubordination. What shows up is unauthorized use of lethal force. What shows up is a soldier who thinks her judgment supersedes the chain of command. My judgment saved a man's life, and it ends your career as an operator. Effective immediately, you are reclassified to medical services. You will serve as a combat medic. You will not carry a primary weapon. You will not engage in direct combat operations. This is not a negotiation. This is the only alternative to a court-martial. Take it or leave it. Emily sat there. 15 years of service, 3 deployments, Ranger School, commendations, awards, sacrifices that had cost her a marriage and left scars on her body that ached when it rained. All of it reduced to a binary choice. Become a medic or lose everything. She took the deal, and for 2 years she buried the soldier. She wrapped bandages instead of loading magazines. She learned to stand behind the line instead of on it. She told herself it was enough. She told herself healing was just as noble as fighting. Most days, she almost believed it. The Chinook's rear ramp began to lower. Hot desert air flooded the cabin. Walker stood up and slapped the shoulder of the first man in line. "Go time. Stay sharp." One by one, the SEALs filed off the ramp and into the darkness. Emily went last. Her boots hit dry ground, sand, and rocks. The compound was a dark shape 400 meters north, barely visible even through night vision. She set up at the rally point, opened her medical bag, laid out her tools: tourniquet, chest seal, needle decompression kit, hemostatic gauze, IV line, morphine auto-injectors. Everything in order, everything within reach. Then she waited. The radio traffic was calm at first. Walker's team moving in 2 columns. Briggs reporting visual on the compound wall. The breacher, a specialist named Dunlap, confirming charge placement. "Breach in 3, 2, 1. The explosion echoed across the valley. Emily heard it a half second after she saw the flash. Then gunfire. A lot of gunfire, way too much for 4 to 6 hostiles. Walker's voice came through tight and fast. "Contact! Contact all sides! Heavy resistance! This is not what we were briefed." More gunfire. Overlapping. Automatic weapons. Then a sound Emily recognized in her bones. The whoosh and crack of an RPG. "RPG! RPG!" The explosion was massive. Even from 200 meters away, Emily felt the shockwave in her chest. Ramos screamed over the radio. "Torres is down! I'm hit! I'm hit in the leg!" Another voice, panicked, young. "They're everywhere, 3 sides. They were waiting for us." Walker, still controlled but barely. "Fall back to the main structure. Move! Move now!" Emily was on her feet. Her instinct said, "Go." Every fiber of her training said, "Sprint toward the wounded and start working." But her orders said, "Stay. Stay at the rally point. Wait for them to bring casualties to you." She heard Torres gasping over an open mic, the wet, rattling sound of a collapsed lung. She knew that sound, not from a textbook, from holding a 19-year-old private in her arms in Kandahar while his chest filled with blood and his eyes went wide and he asked her if he was going to die. She couldn't wait. Emily grabbed her bag and ran. 200 meters of open ground in the dark, with bullets cracking overhead. She ran it in under 40 seconds. When she reached the compound, she found the team crammed into a half-destroyed building. Torres was on his back, lips turning blue. Ramos was propped against a wall, his left thigh soaked in blood. 2 other operators had minor wounds. Everyone else was firing from whatever cover they could find. She slid in beside Torres and ripped open his shirt. Tension pneumothorax. His right lung had collapsed and the trapped air was crushing his heart sideways. He had maybe 2 minutes. She pulled the 14-gauge needle from her kit, found the second intercostal space, and punched it through his chest wall. There was a hiss of escaping air. Torres convulsed, coughed, and sucked in a breath so deep his whole body shuddered. "Stay still," Emily said. "You're breathing. Keep breathing." She moved to Ramos, blood everywhere. She slapped the tourniquet above the wound and cranked it. Ramos grabbed her arm so hard she felt the bones shift. "That's too tight." "It has to be. Your femoral artery is nicked. If I loosen this, you're dead in 90 seconds. So you hold on and let me work." Ramos stared at her, breathing hard. His face was white, but through the pain and the shock, something registered. The speed of her hands, the certainty in her voice, the way she didn't flinch when a bullet punched through the wall 6 inches from her head. "You've done this in combat." "Yes." "Not at a hospital." "No, not at a hospital." He held her gaze for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he nodded and let go of her arm. Holt was at a window, firing burst after burst into the darkness. He burned through a magazine, dropped it, slapped in a new one. How many we got? Briggs, covering the east window, answered between shots. I count at least 20, maybe more. They've got prepared positions. This was a setup. Where's our air support? Walker was on his knees behind a concrete pillar, trying to raise anyone on the radio. Comms are dead. Main antenna took a hit in the first RPG strike. We have no way to call for extraction. The room absorbed that information like a body absorbs a bullet. Silently, painfully. Holt stopped firing for a second. So nobody knows we're in trouble. Nobody knows. How long before they send a QRF? Walker's voice was flat. When we miss our scheduled check-in, that's 3 hours from now. Holt turned from the window. His face was different now. The bravado was gone. The jokes were gone. In their place was the raw, unfiltered fear of a man who just realized he might not make it home. We don't have 3 hours. We have maybe 20 minutes of ammo, maybe less. Walker said nothing because there was nothing to say. Emily finished securing Ramos's tourniquet and moved to check on a third operator who'd taken shrapnel in his forearm. As she worked, she was listening, not just to the voices in the room, to the gunfire outside, to the rhythm of it, the pattern. And she heard something that made her blood go cold. The enemy fire was shifting, concentrating, moving from 3 sides to the north wall. They were stacking up. They were going to breach. She looked at the north wall. Cracks ran from floor to ceiling. Dust rained down with every impact. Someone on the other side was placing charges. She could feel the vibrations through the floor. Emily looked around the room. These men were the best the United States Navy had to offer. Trained killers, elite warriors, and they were going to die in this room. Not because they weren't good enough, but because the math was against them and the plan was wrong. Hold position, wait for rescue. That plan was death. She stood up, walked past Holt, who was reloading his second-to-last magazine, past Briggs, who was pressing a bandage to his own shoulder with one hand while firing with the other. She walked straight to Commander Walker and crouched beside him. Commander, we need to talk. Get back to the wounded, Carter. That's your job. The wounded are stable. What's not stable is this position. That north wall is coming down in the next 5 minutes. When it does, they'll pour in and overrun us. We don't have the ammunition to hold. Walker grabbed her arm. Not like Holt had. Not to hurt. To silence. I said get back. That is an order. Sir, with all respect, that order is going to kill your entire team. The room froze. Even the operators who were firing paused for half a second to look. Holt spun from his window. Who the hell do you think you are? Emily ignored him. Her eyes stayed locked on Walker. I know what I'm looking at, Commander. I've been in this exact situation. I know how they stage a breach. I know the pattern of their fire. They're consolidating north because that's where the wall is weakest. In 4 minutes, they blow it. In 5, they rush us. In 6, we're all dead. Walker searched her face. He was looking for panic, for bluff, for the wide-eyed desperation of a medic who was in over her head and flailing. He didn't find any of it. What he found was something he hadn't seen in a long time. Certainty. The kind you can't fake. The kind that only comes from having lived through the thing you're describing. Who are you, Carter? And there it was, the question, the crack in the wall she'd built around herself for 2 years. She could lie. She could say nothing. She could go back to the wounded and wait for the wall to fall and die quietly in her lane like a good soldier. Or she could do what she did 2 years ago in a basement 4,000 miles away. She could make the choice nobody else was willing to make. I'm Staff Sergeant Emily Carter, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 combat deployments, Ranger School graduate, designated marksman. I was reclassified after an unauthorized engagement that saved a hostage's life. They made me a medic because I broke the rules to save a man. And right now, Commander, I'm telling you that if we stay in this room, following the playbook, every single person here dies. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The gunfire outside continued, relentless. But inside that room, time had stopped. Holt stared at her like she'd just pulled off a mask and revealed a completely different person underneath. Ramos, bleeding on the floor, let out a sound that might have been a laugh. Briggs just shook his head slowly, like a man watching a card trick he couldn't figure out. Walker looked at her for 5 seconds. 10. An eternity in combat. Then he said the words that changed everything. "What's the plan?" And just as Emily opened her mouth to answer, the north wall exploded inward, and the screaming started. The north wall came apart like it was made of paper. Concrete and dust and heat blew inward and knocked 3 men off their feet. Emily hit the ground face first. Her ears rang, her vision blurred. Something heavy landed across her back, and she couldn't breathe for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4. Then training took over. She shoved the debris off and rolled sideways. Through the dust, she saw the gap in the wall, 8 feet wide. And through that gap, shadows were already moving. Walker was shouting, but she couldn't hear the words, just the shape of his mouth. "Move, move, move." Emily grabbed Torres by the drag handle on his plate carrier and hauled him backward. He screamed. She didn't stop. She dragged him 6 feet behind an overturned concrete slab and dropped him. "Stay down. Don't move." The first enemy fighter came through the breach. He was fast. He had his weapon up, and he was already firing before his second foot hit the floor. Rounds punched into the wall where Torres had been lying 3 seconds earlier. Briggs dropped him with 2 shots from the east window. The fighter fell forward and didn't move. A second fighter came through, then a third, then 2 more at the same time. Holt was screaming and firing, short bursts, controlled. His training was kicking in, but his voice told a different story. There was panic in it now. Real panic. The kind that comes when a man realizes the thing he trained for his whole life is actually happening, and it's worse than anything he imagined. There's too many. There's too many of them. Walker was up and firing from behind the pillar. His left arm was useless, so he braced his rifle against the concrete and shot one-handed. He dropped a fighter, then another, but they kept coming through the gap like water through a broken pipe. Emily was on the ground behind the concrete slab with Torres. She could see everything from this angle. The breach, the fighters pouring in, her teammates firing from their positions, and she could see the geometry of it, the way the angles worked, the way the enemy was flooding in without any resistance at the breach point itself. Nobody was covering the gap. They were all firing from their individual positions, picking off fighters as they entered, but nobody was at the breach point laying down suppressive fire to stop the flow. It was like trying to bail water out of a sinking boat without plugging the hole. She looked to her right. On the ground 3 feet away was an M4 rifle. It belonged to the SEAL who'd been standing at the north wall when it blew. He was on his back now, unconscious, blood running from both ears. The rifle had skidded free on impact. Emily stared at it. Her hands knew that weapon. Her muscles remembered the weight of it, the balance, the trigger pull. Every cell in her body was reaching for it, but her mind went somewhere else. It went back to that gray room with the buzzing lights. Colonel Mercer sitting across from her. His words carved into her memory like letters in stone. "You will not carry a primary weapon. You will not engage in direct combat operations. This is not a negotiation." If she picked up that rifle, everything she'd accepted for 2 years was a lie. Every compromise, every swallowed word, every night she told herself she was doing the right thing by staying in her lane. All of it, gone. One choice, one trigger pull, and she'd never be able to go back. A fighter made it through the breach and charged straight at Holt's position. Holt was reloading. He didn't see him. The fighter raised his weapon at Holt's back. Emily didn't think. She lunged for the M4, brought it up to her shoulder, found the fighter's center mass through the dust and the chaos and the red haze of adrenaline, and she fired. 1 round. The fighter dropped 2 feet behind Holt, dead before he hit the ground. Holt spun around. He saw the dead fighter behind him. He saw the rifle in Emily's hands. He saw the look on her face. Not fear, not hesitation. Something cold and precise and absolutely terrifying. "What the—" "Reload your weapon," Emily said. "Now." He reloaded. Emily moved forward, not toward the wounded, toward the breach. Every step was a violation. Every step was a court-martial. Every step was the end of her career as she knew it. She didn't care. She reached the left side of the breach gap and pressed her back against the remaining wall. Dust was still falling. She could feel the vibration of footsteps on the other side. More fighters, stacking up, preparing for the next wave. She leaned around the edge and fired 3 rounds into the cluster of shadows on the other side. 2 dropped, the rest scattered. She pulled back behind cover. Fired again when the next one appeared. Dropped him. Walker watched from across the room. His one good hand had stopped working his rifle. He was just watching her. The way she moved, the way she positioned her body, the way she checked her angles and controlled her breathing between shots. That wasn't medic training. That wasn't luck. That was years of close quarters combat drilled into muscle and bone until it became instinct. "Ramos," Walker said quietly. Ramos, still on the floor with the tourniquet crushing his thigh, turned his head. "Yeah? You seeing what I'm seeing?" "Been seeing it since she stuck that needle in Torres's chest. That woman's not a medic, boss, not even close." Emily fired twice more. Another fighter down. She was counting. Every round, every magazine. She had 1 full mag in the rifle and half of another in the pouch of the unconscious SEAL beside her. Maybe 50 rounds total. 50 rounds between 12 people and death. She pulled back from the breach and turned to Walker. "Commander, I've plugged the gap for now, but they're going to regroup. We have maybe 4 minutes before the next push, and it'll be bigger than the last one." Walker looked at her, really looked at her. "You said you had a plan before the wall blew." "I still do." "Then talk." Emily moved to the center of the room, keeping low. She spoke fast and clear. "They're focused on the north breach because that's where they created the opening. They pulled fighters from the south and east to stack the north assault. That means the south side is weak right now. Maybe 2 or 3 shooters holding a perimeter, probably not expecting us to push out." Holt cut in. "Push out? Are you insane? We're outnumbered and pinned down and you want to go outside?" "I want to stop dying inside. We split into 2 elements. Alpha holds this position, maintains fire on the north breach, keeps them thinking we're still defending in place. Bravo element, 3 shooters and me, punches through the south wall, flanks east, and hits their staging area from behind. We collapse their position from the outside while they're focused on getting in." Silence. 5 seconds of it, which in a gunfight feels like an hour. Briggs spoke first. "That's a Ranger playbook. Break the siege from the inside out." Emily looked at him. "Yes, it is. They teach you that at nursing school?" "No, they taught me that at Fort Benning." Walker made his decision in the time it took to blink. "Briggs, Dunlap, you're with Carter. Bravo element. You breach south in 90 seconds. Everyone else, hold north and make noise. Keep them looking this way." Holt couldn't believe it. "Sir, you're putting a medic in charge of a flanking element? A medic?" Walker's voice dropped to a register that Emily had never heard from him before. Low. Final. The voice of a man who had just stopped pretending. "She's not a medic, Holt. I don't know exactly what she is yet, but she's the only person in this room with a plan that doesn't end with all of us in body bags. So you will shut your mouth and you will cover the north breach, and you will do it now." Holt opened his mouth, closed it, turned back to the window, and raised his rifle. Emily looked at Briggs and Dunlap. Both men met her eyes. Neither argued, neither questioned. Something had shifted in the room, something fundamental. The woman they'd mocked 12 hours ago was now the person they were trusting with their lives. 90 seconds, Emily said. "Dunlap, you have a breaching charge left?" "One. Small. That's enough. Place it at the base of the south wall, center. We blow it and go out fast. Briggs, you're first through. I'm second. Dunlap, you cover our 6. Dunlap was already moving. He pressed the charge against the south wall and ran the detonator cord back to a safe distance. Briggs checked his magazine. 1 full, 1 partial. Emily checked hers. 43 rounds. She'd counted during the last exchange. Commander, Emily said, when we blow south, I need you to increase fire on the north breach. Maximum rate. Empty everything you have for 30 seconds. Make them think you're making a last stand. Walker nodded. 30 seconds of everything we've got. After that, we're dry. After that, you won't need to fire. Either we've flanked them or we're dead. Either way, the shooting stops. Walker almost smiled. Almost. You always this cheerful? Only when people are trying to kill me. She looked at her watch. 12 seconds. She looked at Torres, still breathing on the floor. At Ramos, white-faced and gripping his tourniquet. At Holt, pressed against the window frame, jaw clenched, knuckles white on his rifle. At Walker, battered and bleeding, and still commanding. These men didn't choose her. They didn't want her. 12 hours ago, she was cargo, a Band-Aid with legs, the nurse they expected to cry before the first shot. Now she was their only chance. Dunlap, blow it! The south wall blew outward. Not as dramatic as the north breach. A clean hole, 4 feet wide. Cool night air rushed in. Briggs went through first, fast and low. Emily was right behind him. Dunlap followed. Behind them, Walker opened up on the north breach. Every operator who could still fire unleashed everything they had. The noise was deafening. It sounded like the whole building was coming apart. Emily was outside now, moving along the south wall, heading east. The night air tasted like dust and cordite. She could hear the enemy fire concentrating on the north side. Walker's distraction was working. They rounded the southeast corner. Emily held up a fist. Stop. She dropped to one knee and listened. Ahead, maybe 30 meters, she could hear voices. Arabic. Urgent. Commanding. That was the staging area, the place where they were coordinating the assault. She held up 3 fingers, 3 hostiles visible. Then she pointed to herself and to the left, pointed to Briggs and to the right. Dunlap would hold center. Briggs nodded. No words, no questions. He moved. Emily crept forward. She could see them now through her night vision. 3 fighters crouched behind a low wall, loading magazines, talking rapidly. Behind them, 4 more were carrying what looked like another RPG warhead toward the north side of the compound. 7 total. She had 43 rounds. She steadied her breathing, aligned her sights on the nearest fighter. Her finger found the trigger, and she hesitated. Not because she was afraid, not because she doubted her ability, but because 2 years of conditioning, 2 years of being told she was not allowed to do this, 2 years of Colonel Mercer's voice in her head telling her she was a weapon without a safety, crashed into her consciousness like a wave. You are a medic. You heal people. You do not kill. The fighter with the RPG warhead turned and started walking toward the north side. If he reached the breach, he would fire that warhead into the room where Torres and Ramos and Walker and Holt were huddled together. Emily exhaled. She fired. The first fighter dropped. She shifted, fired again. The second dropped. Briggs opened up from the right, Dunlap from center. In 4 seconds, all 7 fighters were down. No hesitation after the first shot. No mercy. No regret. Emily was moving before the last body hit the ground. Push forward. Take their position. They swept into the enemy staging area. Ammunition, weapons, radio equipment, and something else. A field radio tuned to a frequency that Emily recognized. Military. Coalition. She grabbed the radio and keyed it. Any station, this is Bravo Element, call sign Phantom. We are a U.S. Special Operations team under heavy contact at grid. She rattled off the coordinates from memory. Multiple casualties, comms destroyed, requesting immediate QRF and air support. How copy? Static. Her heart hammered. Then a voice, clear, American. Phantom, this is Warhorse Base. We copy all. QRF is spinning up. ETA 35 minutes. Can you hold? 35 minutes, an eternity. We'll hold. Get them here. She switched to the team's backup frequency and called Walker. Commander, Bravo element has neutralized the south staging area. We have comms. QRF is 35 minutes out. Walker's voice came back, and for the first time all night, it cracked. Not from pain, from relief. Say that again. 35 minutes, sir. Help is coming. A pause, then Walker's voice, thick and raw. Good work, Carter. Good work. Emily heard something in the background of the transmission. She couldn't be sure, but it sounded like Holt saying something she never expected to hear from him. Thank God for her. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then she opened them and got back to work. Briggs, set up a firing position covering the east approach. Dunlap, I need you on the north side, where we can enfilade anyone still pushing the breach. I'm going to redistribute this ammunition to the team inside. She loaded captured magazines into every pocket and pouch she had. Then she ran back to the south breach and pushed inside. She dropped magazines in front of every operator who was still firing. Fresh ammo. We have 33 minutes until extraction. Holt looked at the magazine she dropped beside him. Then he looked at her. His face was covered in dust and sweat and something that might have been tears. He tried to speak. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. Emily didn't wait for words. She moved to Torres and checked his vitals. Pulse steady, breathing shallow but stable. She moved to Ramos. The tourniquet was holding. He'd lost a lot of blood, but he was conscious, alert. Hey, Ranger, Ramos said. Emily looked at him. That's what you are, right? A Ranger. Was. Ramos shook his head slowly. No, you still are. You never stopped being one. They just made you pretend. Emily didn't answer. She adjusted his IV line and checked his blood pressure. But her jaw tightened and her eyes burned and she blinked twice, fast, and moved on to the next patient. 29 minutes. The enemy regrouped faster than she expected. They hit the north breach again, harder this time, furious that their staging area had been destroyed. But now the math was different. Dunlap was outside, firing into their flank. Briggs was covering the east. Emily had distributed enough ammunition to give every operator inside another 8 to 10 minutes of sustained fire. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't safe. But it was survivable. At the 22-minute mark, a third wave came, bigger than the first two. They hit from the north and the east simultaneously. Briggs took a round in his plate carrier that knocked him flat. He got back up and kept firing. Dunlap ran dry and switched to his sidearm. Emily was back at the north breach, rifle up, dropping fighters as they tried to push through. Her magazine ran empty. She grabbed one of the captured enemy rifles off the floor, checked the chamber by feel, and kept firing. Different weapon, different caliber, different trigger pull. She adjusted in less than a second. Walker watched her pick up that enemy rifle and keep shooting without missing a beat, and he said something under his breath that nobody else heard. But Ramos was close enough to read his lips. Where the hell has she been all my life? 19 minutes. 14. The enemy pulled back. Not a retreat, a regroup. Emily could feel it. They were done with small pushes. Whatever was coming next would be everything they had left. One final, overwhelming assault. She moved back to Walker. Commander, they're massing for a final push. If they commit everything, we can't hold the breach. How long until QRF? 12 minutes. Can you buy 12 minutes? Emily looked at the breach, at the dust still hanging in the air, at the bodies on both sides of the wall, at the men behind her, exhausted, bleeding, running on nothing but adrenaline, and the desperate hope that the sound of helicopter rotors would come before the sound of the final charge. "I can buy 12 minutes." She turned to Holt. He was sitting against the wall, reloading his last captured magazine. His hands were shaking, not from cold. "Holt," he looked up, "I need you at the breach with me." He stared at her. This was the woman he'd choked on the helicopter, the woman he'd called a nobody, the woman he'd bet would cry before the first explosion. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He stood up. He walked to the breach and took position on the right side. Emily took the left. They stood there side by side, weapons raised, staring into the darkness where the enemy was gathering. Holt spoke without looking at her. His voice was quiet, stripped of everything. No bravado, no cruelty. Just a man standing next to the person who'd saved his life, trying to find words that were big enough for what he felt. "I'm sorry." Emily kept her eyes forward. "I know. No, I need to say it. What I did on the helicopter, what I said, I was wrong. About all of it." "You were. How do you not hate me?" Emily was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Because hate takes energy I need for keeping you alive. So you can apologize properly when we get home." Holt let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for hours. "Deal." 9 minutes. They heard them before they saw them. Footsteps. Dozens. Moving fast. The final push was coming. Emily pressed her back against the wall and whispered to herself, not a prayer, a promise. 12 men walked onto that helicopter. 12 are walking off. Then the darkness exploded with gunfire, and Emily Carter stepped into the breach. She stepped into the breach and fired before her front foot hit the ground. The first fighter was 5 meters out, sprinting straight at the gap with his rifle at his hip. Emily put 2 rounds center mass, and he folded. The second was right behind him, so close she could see the whites of his eyes through her night vision. She shifted her aim 3 inches left and dropped him with a single shot to the chest. Holt opened up from the right side. Controlled bursts. 3 rounds. Pause. 3 rounds. He was steady now. Whatever fear had been in him 20 minutes ago had been burned away by something stronger. Shame, maybe. Or the desperate need to prove to the woman beside him that he was worth saving. 3 more fighters rushed the breach together, shoulder to shoulder, screaming. Emily and Holt fired simultaneously. 2 dropped. The third made it through the gap, and Emily spun, caught him with a round at close range, and watched him stumble backward into the wall. 8 minutes until QRF. "Magazine," Emily called. Holt reached into his pouch without looking and tossed her his last spare. She caught it, dropped the empty, slapped the fresh one in, and was firing again in under 2 seconds. Walker was behind them, propped against the pillar, his one working hand pressing a radio to his ear. "Warhorse Base, this is Phantom Actual. What is QRF status? We are under heavy assault, multiple waves." The voice came back tinny and distant. "Phantom, QRF is 7 minutes out. 2 Black Hawks and a gun platform. Hold your position." "We're trying," Walker said, and the exhaustion in his voice was so thick it sounded like a man drowning. Emily heard the transmission. 7 minutes. She did the math in her head while firing. She had maybe 20 rounds left in this magazine. Holt had 1 partial. Behind them, the rest of the team was nearly dry. Briggs was outside somewhere with a sidearm and maybe 6 rounds. Dunlap had gone silent on the radio 3 minutes ago, and Emily didn't know if he was dead or alive. 7 minutes with almost nothing left. A burst of automatic fire ripped through the breach and chewed up the wall above Emily's head. She ducked, felt concrete chips cut her forehead, tasted blood on her upper lip. She wiped it with her sleeve and leaned back out. 4 fighters, advancing in pairs, leapfrogging, cover and move. These weren't untrained militia. These were disciplined. Someone had coached them. "Holt, the pair on the left. I've got right." "Copy." They fired together. 3 went down. The 4th dove behind rubble and started shooting from a prone position. His rounds were accurate. One snapped past Emily's ear so close she felt the heat of it. She couldn't get an angle on him. He was too low, too well covered. "I can't hit him from here," she said. "Me neither." The fighter kept firing, pinning them, buying time for the next wave to stack up behind him. Emily made a decision in half a second. She dropped to the ground, belly flat, and crawled forward through the breach, into the open, into the kill zone. She heard Holt screaming behind her. "Carter, what the hell are you doing? Get back here." She kept crawling. Broken concrete tore through her sleeves and cut into her forearms. She reached a chunk of fallen wall, braced her rifle on it, and now she had the angle. She could see the prone fighter from the side. He didn't see her. One shot. He stopped moving. Emily crawled backward to the breach. Holt grabbed her plate carrier and hauled her inside. "Are you out of your mind?" "Probably. How many rounds do you have left?" Holt checked. 7. Emily had 12, 19 rounds between them, and she could hear more footsteps approaching through the darkness. 6 minutes. "Walker," Emily called. "We're almost dry. Is there anything left in this room?" Walker looked around. Ramos was conscious but couldn't move. Torres was breathing but unconscious. 2 other operators had minor wounds and were down to their sidearms. One of them, a quiet operator named Jensen, who hadn't said 10 words all night, spoke up. "I've got a fragmentation grenade. 1." Emily looked at him. "Give it to me." Jensen didn't hesitate. He pulled the grenade from his vest and tossed it across the room. Emily caught it with one hand. "When the next wave hits, I'm going to let them stack up at the breach. Let them think we're out of ammunition. When they bunch up to push through, I drop this in the middle of them." Holt shook his head. "That's insane. If you time it wrong, that grenade kills us too." "Then I won't time it wrong." 5 minutes. The gunfire outside stopped. That was worse than the noise. Silence in a firefight means the enemy is reorganizing. It means they're about to do something coordinated, something big. Emily pressed her back against the wall beside the breach. She held the grenade in her left hand, rifle in her right. 12 rounds and 1 fragmentation grenade. That was everything standing between 12 Americans and annihilation. She listened. Footsteps. A lot of them. Moving slowly now, carefully. They'd learned from the last 3 waves. They weren't going to sprint into the breach anymore. They were going to approach smart, stack up, and overwhelm with numbers. Emily turned to Holt and spoke barely above a whisper. "When I throw this, you grab everyone who can move and pull them toward the south breach. Don't wait for me. I'm not leaving you. I'm not asking, and I'm not doing it." Emily looked at him. His face was filthy. Blood from a cut on his scalp had dried in a streak down his cheek. His eyes were red and raw. This was not the same man who had choked her on the helicopter. That man was gone, burned away in the forge of this night. What was left was someone stripped down to his core, and at his core, Danny Holt was a man who did not leave people behind. "Then stay close," Emily said. 4 minutes. She could hear them at the breach now, whispering, shuffling, the clink of metal on metal. She held up 3 fingers to Holt, counted down. 3, 2, 1. She pulled the pin, let the spoon fly, counted 1001, 1002, and lobbed the grenade through the breach in a low arc. The explosion was sharp and violent. Screams, the sound of bodies hitting the ground. Dust and smoke blasted back through the gap. "Now," Emily said. She stepped into the breach and fired. 5 rounds. Fast. Everyone hit a target. Holt was beside her, firing his last 7. Through the smoke, she counted 8 fighters down and more falling back, disoriented, broken. The wave was shattered. But Emily was empty. She dropped her rifle, pulled her sidearm. 9 rounds of 9mm. That was all she had left in the world. 3 minutes. And then she heard it. Rotors. Distant at first, a low, thudding rhythm that grew louder with every heartbeat. The sound that every soldier in a desperate fight prays to hear. The sound that means someone is coming. The sound that means you might live. Walker heard it too. He keyed the radio with his broken hand, teeth clenched against the pain. Warhorse, Phantom, Actual. I can hear rotors. Confirm QRF inbound. Phantom, Warhorse confirms. 2 Black Hawks and 1 Apache gun platform. They have your position marked. ETA 90 seconds. Pop smoke if able. Walker looked around the room. Does anyone have smoke? Jensen reached into his vest. His hand came out with a purple smoke grenade, the last piece of ordnance any of them carried. Toss it out the south breach, Walker said. Now. Jensen threw it. Purple smoke billowed into the night air. Emily was still at the north breach, sidearm up, watching for any movement. The enemy had pulled back after the grenade, but she could feel them out there, regrouping, deciding whether to push one more time or cut their losses. She heard the Apache before she saw it, a low, predatory growl that grew into a roar. Then the sky lit up. The 30mm chain gun on the Apache opened up with a sound like the earth itself was tearing apart. Rounds chewed into the enemy positions north and east of the compound. Explosions, secondary detonations. The enemy had been storing ammunition in their staging areas, and now it was cooking off. 90 seconds. The first Black Hawk swept in low over the compound. A crew chief leaned out the door, scanning the ground. Emily stepped out of the south breach and waved. The helicopter banked and settled into a hover 30 meters away. Rotor wash blasting sand and debris in every direction. Go, Emily shouted. Get the wounded out first. Holt and Jensen carried Torres between them. His head rolled, but he was breathing. They loaded him through the side door of the Black Hawk. Ramos was next. 2 operators dragged him on a makeshift litter made from a poncho liner. He was gray in the face, but conscious. As they lifted him toward the door, he grabbed Emily's arm. Hey, Ranger, she looked at him. I owe you my leg, maybe my life. You can buy me a beer when we get back. I'll buy you a whole damn bar. They loaded him in. The second Black Hawk landed on the east side. The remaining operators split between the 2 aircraft. Briggs appeared from the darkness, limping, his plate carrier cracked where the round had hit it. He'd been outside the whole time, firing until he was empty, then hiding in a ditch and waiting. He climbed aboard without a word. Emily did a head count as each man loaded. 1, 2, 3. She counted every face. She matched it against the roster in her head. 11 SEALs had walked off that Chinook. She needed 11 on these Black Hawks. 10. She counted 10. Where's Dunlap? Nobody answered. Where is Dunlap? Briggs looked at her from the Black Hawk door. He was covering the north from outside. I lost contact with him 20 minutes ago. Emily's stomach dropped. Dunlap, the breacher, the quiet kid who'd placed the charge on the south wall without a single question, who'd followed her into the dark without hesitation. She turned away from the helicopter and started running back toward the compound. Walker screamed after her from inside the Black Hawk. Carter! Carter, get back here! We need to go! She didn't stop. Carter, that is a direct order. She kept running. Holt jumped out of the helicopter. Walker grabbed for him and missed. Holt, get back on this aircraft. Holt didn't listen. He sprinted after Emily. She rounded the northeast corner of the compound. The Apache was still working the enemy positions further out, its gun chewing through whatever resistance was left. But close to the building, it was quiet. Too quiet. Emily found Dunlap 30 meters from the north wall. He was face down in the dirt. His sidearm was still in his hand. 3 empty magazines lay scattered around him. He'd fought until he had nothing left, and then he'd been hit. She dropped to her knees beside him and rolled him over. Blood, a lot of it. Entry wound in his lower right abdomen, below the plate carrier. She pressed her fingers to his neck. Pulse, weak, thready, but there. He's alive, she said. Holt arrived beside her, breathing hard. How bad? Bad. Abdominal wound. He's lost a lot of blood. Help me carry him." They got Dunlap up between them, his arms over their shoulders, his feet dragging. He groaned once but didn't wake up. They moved as fast as they could back toward the waiting Blackhawk. The crew chief saw them coming and jumped down to help. They loaded Dunlap onto the floor of the aircraft. Emily climbed in after him and immediately went to work. She tore open his shirt, packed the wound with the last of her hemostatic gauze, applied pressure with both hands, and screamed at the crew chief. "Tell the pilot we have a critical casualty. He needs a surgical team the second we land. Do it now," the crew chief relayed. The Blackhawk's engines roared. The aircraft lifted off. Below them, the compound shrank into darkness. The fires were still burning. The Apache was still circling, but they were leaving. They were alive. Emily kept pressure on Dunlap's wound. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and thick. She could feel his pulse under her hands, fluttering like a trapped bird. "Stay with me, Dunlap, you hear me? You stay with me." His eyelids flickered. His lips moved. "What? Say it again." His voice was barely a breath. "Did we get them all out?" Emily's throat tightened so hard she couldn't speak for a second. This kid, shot and bleeding and dying on the floor of a helicopter, and his first question was about his team. "Everyone's out," she said. "All 12, because of you." His lips curved, just slightly, the ghost of a smile. Then his eyes closed and his head fell to the side. "Dunlap! Dunlap!" She checked his pulse. Still there, fading, but there. She looked up. Holt was sitting across from her, staring at Dunlap, staring at the blood on Emily's hands, staring at everything he'd gotten wrong. "He followed you out there," Holt said. "When you came up with that plan, he didn't question it for a second. He just went. That's because he's a soldier. He did his job." "No," Holt's voice broke. Not a crack, a full break. The kind that happens when a man runs out of walls to hide behind. "He followed you because he trusted you. We all should have trusted you from the start." The Blackhawk banked hard and accelerated. Emily kept her hands on Dunlap's wound and her eyes on his face. In the dim red glow of the cabin lights, she looked exactly like she had at the beginning of the night. Quiet, steady, unbroken. But everything else had changed. Walker's voice came over the internal radio from the other Blackhawk. "Carter, you copy?" She keyed the mic with her elbow, hands still pressed to Dunlap. "I copy. Full team is accounted for. All 12. I'm putting you in for a commendation." Emily closed her eyes. A commendation. 2 years ago, they'd stripped her of everything for doing the same thing she did tonight. For choosing lives over rules. For trusting her own judgment when the chain of command failed. They'd punished her, silenced her, buried her in a medic's uniform, and told her to stay in her lane. And now they wanted to give her a medal. "Carter, you hear me?" "I hear you, Commander. You saved my team tonight. Every single one of them." Emily looked down at Dunlap. His blood was on her hands, her arms, her shirt, soaking through the knees of her pants. She could feel his heartbeat getting weaker. She pressed harder. "We're not done yet, sir. Dunlap still needs a surgeon." "Surgical team is standing by at base, 10 minutes out." 10 minutes. She'd been counting minutes all night. Minutes until the wall collapsed. Minutes until QRF arrived. Minutes of ammunition. Minutes of life. This entire night had been measured in minutes, and every single one of them had felt like a lifetime. She pressed harder on the wound. She leaned close to Dunlap's ear. 10 minutes, kid. That's all I'm asking. You give me 10 more minutes, and I'll give you the rest of your life. Deal?" Dunlap didn't answer, but his pulse held. Weak, stubborn, refusing to stop. Just like her. The Blackhawk tore through the night sky toward the base. Emily Carter knelt on the floor with a dying man's blood between her fingers and the weight of 12 lives on her shoulders. And for the first time since Colonel Mercer sat her down in that gray room 2 years ago and told her she was no longer a soldier, she felt whole. Not because she'd picked up a rifle, not because she'd killed, but because she'd finally stopped pretending to be something she wasn't. She'd spent 2 years trying to fit into a box that someone else built for her, and tonight that box had shattered, and what came out of it was exactly what the world needed at exactly the right moment. She was a healer, she was a fighter, she was a leader, and she was done apologizing for any of it. The lights of the forward operating base appeared on the horizon. Emily saw the surgical team waiting on the tarmac, stretchers ready, lights blazing. She checked Dunlap's pulse one more time. Still there. She exhaled, and the breath that left her body carried 2 years of silence with it. The Black Hawk's skids hit the tarmac at 0437 hours, and Emily was screaming before the rotors slowed down. Abdominal gunshot wound, entry lower right quadrant, no exit, massive blood loss. He's been down approximately 35 minutes. Pulse thready and dropping. Move! Move now! The surgical team swarmed the aircraft. 4 medics, 2 surgeons, a trauma nurse. They lifted Dunlap onto a stretcher and sprinted toward the field hospital. Emily ran beside them, one hand still pressed against the wound packing, unwilling to let go until someone with clean gloves took over. A surgeon, a lieutenant colonel with gray temples and steady hands, grabbed her wrist. "I've got him. Let go." Emily didn't let go. "Lieutenant, I've got him. You need to let go now." She looked down at her hands. Dunlap's blood had dried in layers, fresh over old, dark over bright. Her fingers were stiff from holding pressure for so long that the tendons had locked. She released him. They rushed Dunlap through the double doors and Emily stopped. She stood there on the tarmac in the pre-dawn gray, covered in blood that wasn't hers, holding hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Not from cold, not from adrenaline, from the sudden, violent absence of purpose. For 5 hours she'd had one job, keep people alive. And now the last person who needed her had been taken behind doors she couldn't follow through. She stood alone. 30 seconds, a minute. The rotors wound down behind her. The second Black Hawk landed and the rest of the team unloaded. Stretchers for Torres and Ramos. Walking wounded helped by teammates. Walker came off last, his left arm in a makeshift sling, face gray, steps unsteady. He walked past the medical teams, past his own men, and stopped directly in front of Emily. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Walker looked at her hands, at the blood, at her face streaked with dirt and sweat, and that one cut across her forehead that she'd never bothered to treat because there was always someone more wounded. "How bad is Dunlap?" "Bad, but he had a pulse when they took him in. That's more than he should have had." Walker nodded slowly. "You went back for him?" "Yes." "I ordered you not to." "Yes." "You disobeyed a direct order. Again." Emily met his eyes. She was too tired for fear, too emptied out for politics. "Yes, sir, I did, and I'd do it again right now if I had to." Walker stared at her. Then something happened to his face that Emily had never seen from a SEAL commander. His jaw trembled. Just once, just for a second. He locked it down immediately, the way men who lead warriors for a living learn to lock everything down. But she saw it, and he knew she saw it. "Dunlap is 23 years old," Walker said. "He just got married 4 months ago. His wife is 7 months pregnant. If you hadn't gone back, I would be making a phone call right now that would destroy a family." Emily said nothing. There was nothing to say. Walker straightened up. "Go get yourself cleaned up, Carter. Medical is going to want to check you out. And then," he paused, "then we're going to have a very long conversation about who you really are." He walked away toward the command post. Emily watched him go. Holt appeared beside her. He'd been standing a few feet back, waiting. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. His face was hollow. His eyes were swollen. The cockiness that had defined him 12 hours ago had been burned out of him so completely that it was hard to believe he was the same person. "Carter. Holt. Is there somewhere I can get coffee around here?" Emily almost laughed. It came out as a sound somewhere between a cough and a sob. Mess hall, north side of the base. Can I bring you one? She looked at him, really looked at him, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Not guilt, though that was there. Not shame, though that was there too. She saw a man who was rebuilding himself from the ground up, one small act of decency at a time, and he was starting with a cup of coffee. Black, no sugar. Got it, he walked away. Emily stood on the tarmac for another 30 seconds. Then her knees buckled, and she sat down right there on the concrete. She put her head between her knees, and she breathed. In and out. In and out. The way she'd breathed through Ranger School. The way she'd breathed through 3 deployments. The way she'd breathed through 2 years of being told she was less than what she was. In and out, until the shaking stopped. 06, 22 hours. Emily had showered, changed into clean fatigues, and was sitting in the base medical station getting the cut on her forehead stitched, when a staff sergeant she didn't recognize appeared in the doorway. Lieutenant Carter? That's me. Colonel Mercer is on base. He's requesting your presence in the command briefing room. Immediately. Emily's hands went cold. Mercer, the man who had ended her career as an operator, the man who had forced her into a medic's uniform and told her to stay in her lane forever. He was here, on this base, and he wanted to see her. The medic stitching her forehead paused. I'm not done. Yes, you are. Emily stood up, pulled the surgical tape across the remaining wound herself, and walked out. The command briefing room was a concrete box with fluorescent lights and a long metal table. Colonel David Mercer sat at the head of that table. He looked exactly the same as he had 2 years ago. Silver hair cropped tight, face like carved granite, eyes that gave nothing away. He was reading a file when Emily walked in. He didn't look up. Emily stood at attention. Lieutenant Carter reporting as ordered, sir. Mercer turned a page, read something, turned another page. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on Emily's shoulders. Finally, he closed the file and looked up. Sit down, Carter. She sat. Mercer folded his hands on the table. The same gesture, the same posture, the same buzzing, fluorescent lights. Emily felt like she'd stepped into a time machine and landed in the worst day of her life. I've read Commander Walker's after-action report, Mercer said. I've read the statements from every member of the team. I've reviewed the radio transcripts, the QRF debrief, and the Apache gun camera footage. Emily said nothing. Do you know what all of those sources agree on? No, sir. They agree that you violated your reclassification terms, that you engaged in direct combat operations, that you picked up a weapon and killed enemy combatants in violation of the explicit conditions of your continued service. Emily's stomach dropped. Here it was, the end. Not a gray room this time, not a reclassification, a court-martial, dishonorable discharge, 15 years of service erased. They also agree, Mercer continued, and his voice changed, not in volume, not in tone, but in something underneath, something Emily couldn't identify at first, that without your actions, every member of that team would be dead. He opened the file again and read aloud, Commander Walker's statement, quote, Lieutenant Carter's tactical expertise, decisiveness, and combat skill were the sole reason my team survived. Her actions under fire were the most exceptional display of battlefield leadership I have witnessed in 22 years of special operations. End quote. Mercer closed the file. Senior Chief Ramos says you saved his life twice, once with a tourniquet and once with a rifle. Petty Officer Briggs credits your flanking maneuver with breaking the siege. Specialist Dunlap, Mercer paused. Dunlap is in surgery, but before they put him under, he gave a statement to the chaplain. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he followed you out of that building because you were the most competent leader he'd ever served under, and he'd follow you again without hesitation. Emily's throat closed. She pressed her fingernails into her palms under the table so hard she felt skin break. Mercer leaned back in his chair. And then there's Petty Officer Holt's statement. Emily looked up. Holt submitted a 4-page written statement at 05:30 this morning. In it, he describes in detail how he physically assaulted you on the helicopter before the mission, how he verbally abused you, how he and other team members treated you with contempt from the moment you joined the unit. He states that your response to this treatment was, quote, more grace than I deserved and more professionalism than I've ever demonstrated, end quote. Mercer studied her face. He's requesting disciplinary action against himself for the assault. Did you know that? No, sir. He also states that you saved his life directly when a fighter came through the breach behind him, and that you stood beside him at the breach point during the final assault when you could have stayed in cover. He writes, and these are his exact words, "She is the bravest human being I have ever known, and I am ashamed of how I treated her." Emily couldn't speak. Her jaw was locked. Her eyes burned. She blinked and felt moisture on her cheeks, and she hated it because she never cried. She hadn't cried at Ranger School when her body was breaking. She hadn't cried when Mercer took her career away. She hadn't cried once during 5 hours of combat. But Holt's words, the words of a man who had choked her and mocked her and treated her like garbage, those words broke something inside her that all the bullets in the world couldn't touch. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Sir, with respect, what happens now? Mercer was quiet for a long time. He stood up and walked to the corner of the room. He stood with his back to her. She watched his shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. 2 years ago, I sat across from you and told you that you were a weapon without a safety. Do you remember that? Every word, sir. I told you that a soldier who doesn't follow orders is dangerous, that your judgment doesn't supersede the chain of command, that rules exist for a reason. I remember. Mercer turned around, and for the first time, Emily saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Not anger, not authority, pain. The deep, private pain of a man who had made a decision that kept him up at night. I was wrong. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. She sat perfectly still, afraid that if she moved, the moment would shatter. I wasn't wrong about rules, Mercer said. Rules matter. The chain of command matters. Structure keeps people alive. But I was wrong about you. I looked at what you did in that basement 2 years ago, and I saw insubordination. I should have seen what Walker's team saw last night. I should have seen a soldier who reads the battlefield faster than anyone else in the room and makes the right call when everyone else is frozen. He walked back to the table and sat down. I punished you for saving a man's life. I put you in a box and told you to stay there. And last night you broke out of that box and saved 11 more. Emily's voice was raw. I didn't have a choice, sir. They were going to die. You did have a choice. You could have stayed at the rally point like you were ordered. You could have stayed behind the wounded like Walker told you. You could have let someone else pick up that rifle. At every single point, you had the option to follow orders and let the consequences fall on someone else's shoulders. And at every single point, you chose to act. Because inaction would have killed them. Yes, and that's exactly what makes you dangerous, Carter. Not because you don't follow orders, because you see what needs to be done before anyone else does, and you refuse to watch people die while waiting for permission. Mercer opened a drawer under the table and pulled out a folder. Different from the first one, thicker, stamped with classifications Emily recognized. Special Operations Command, Joint Chiefs level. 18 months ago, SOCOM began developing a program, classified, no public name yet. The concept is simple, but the implications are significant. They want combat medics who are fully weapons qualified and authorized to engage in direct action when the tactical situation demands it. Medics who don't have to choose between their weapon and their medical kit. Medics who are trained to heal and trained to fight and trusted to decide in real time Which one the moment requires. He pushed the folder across the table. Guess whose combat record they used as the case study for why this program is needed? Emily stared at the folder. Mine? Your unauthorized engagement 2 years ago. The one I punished you for. SOCOM's program designers cited it as, quote, a textbook example of battlefield decision-making that current ROE fails to account for. They've been looking for someone to lead the pilot program. Someone with medical training and direct action experience. Someone who has proven, under fire, that they can do both. Emily's hands were shaking again. Not from exhaustion this time. I'm not going to pretend this is an apology, Mercer said, because what I did to you 2 years ago, I did with the information I had and the framework I was operating under. I stand by the process even if I got the conclusion wrong. But I can do something now that I couldn't do then. I can give you what you should have had all along. He tapped the folder. Full reinstatement to operational status. Weapons qualification reinstated. Direct action authorization reinstated. You lead the pilot program. You build the team. You write the doctrine. And you answer directly to SOCOM, not to me. Emily opened the folder. She read the first page, then the second. Her eyes moved fast, absorbing details the way they absorb tactical information in combat. Automatic. Precise. This is real, she said, not a question. It's real, and it's yours if you want it. Emily closed the folder. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The same sound as 2 years ago. Everything the same, and everything different. Can I ask you something, sir? Go ahead. If last night hadn't happened, if I'd stayed in my lane, if the mission had gone fine and nobody got hurt, would this program still have come to me? Mercer held her gaze. Honestly, no. It would have gone to someone with a cleaner record and fewer questions attached. Last night forced the issue. Last night made it impossible to give this to anyone but you. Emily nodded. So I had to break the rules one more time to get permission to break the rules. That's one way to put it. What's another way? Mercer leaned forward. Another way is that the system finally caught up to where you've been for 15 years. And it took 11 men nearly dying to make that happen. And I have to live with the fact that I could have gotten there sooner if I'd been paying better attention. That was as close to an apology as Colonel David Mercer had ever come to giving anyone for anything. Emily understood that. She understood the weight of what it cost a man like him to admit he'd been wrong. I'll do it, she said. You'll lead the program? Yes, sir, on one condition. Mercer raised an eyebrow. You're in no position to set conditions, Carter. With respect, sir, I'm in the only position. You just said no one else can do this. So yes, I have a condition. Mercer almost smiled. Almost. What is it? Holt. What about him? He submitted a statement requesting disciplinary action against himself for assaulting me. I want that request denied. I want no action taken against him. Mercer frowned. He put his hands on a fellow service member, on a superior officer technically. That's not nothing. He also stood next to me at a breach point with 7 rounds left and didn't flinch. He followed me back into a firefight to carry out a wounded man when he could have stayed on the helicopter. What he did before the mission was wrong. What he did during the mission was extraordinary. I'm asking you to let the second thing outweigh the first. That's generous of you. It's not generous, it's practical. Holt is a hell of an operator. He had a bad moment and he owned it. The military loses too many good people by punishing them for their worst day and ignoring their best. I'm not interested in that. Mercer studied her for a long time. You're already thinking like a commander. I've been thinking like a commander since I was 22, sir. I just wasn't allowed to act like one. Mercer picked up a pen and made a note in the file. Holt's request for self-discipline will be noted in his record, but no formal action taken. He'll receive counseling. That's the best I can do within regulations. That's enough. Mercer stood up. Emily stood up. They faced each other across the table. One more thing, Carter. Sir? Dunlap made it through surgery. They got the bullet out. He's stable. He's going to need months of recovery, but the surgeons say he'll make it. Emily's knees nearly gave out. She locked them. She pressed her fists against her thighs and she breathed. In and out. The way she always breathed when the world tried to knock her down. Thank you for telling me, sir. His wife is flying in tomorrow. She asked the chaplain for the name of the person who saved her husband's life. I told him to give her your name. Emily couldn't speak. She nodded once. Mercer walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle and turned back. For what it's worth, Carter, when I said 2 years ago that you were a weapon without a safety, I meant it as a warning. Looking at it now, I think I was just describing exactly the kind of soldier we need. We just didn't have a place for you yet. He opened the door. We do now. He left. The door closed. Emily stood alone in the briefing room with the folder in her hands and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She opened the folder again, read the mission statement of the program she was about to lead, read the authorization codes, read the signature lines that would make it official. Then she put the folder down and walked out. She walked across the base to the medical ward. She found Ramos first. He was in a bed with his leg elevated, IV in his arm, face still pale but eyes sharp. Heard you got a new job, Ramos said. Word travels fast. We're SEALs. Gossip is our secondary specialty. Emily sat down beside his bed. How's the leg? Surgeons say I'll keep it. Full recovery, maybe 8 months. My wife is going to kill me. You'll survive. You survived last night. Ramos reached out and grabbed her hand. His grip was nothing like it had been in the compound. Gentle now, deliberate. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. I'm listening. In 17 years of special operations, I've served under some of the best leaders this country has. Men who could read a battlefield like a book. Men who made impossible decisions look easy. And I'm telling you right now, what you did last night, the way you read that fight, the way you adapted, the way you refused to let any of us die, that's the best leadership I've ever seen. And I've never said that to anyone before. Emily squeezed his hand. You're high on morphine, Ramos. Morphine wore off 2 hours ago. This is me sober, and I mean every word. She held his hand for a moment longer. Then she let go and stood up. Get some rest. I'll check on you tomorrow. She walked down the hall, past Torres's room. He was asleep, chest tube draining, monitors beeping steadily. He was going to make it. She found Dunlap's room at the end of the corridor. He was unconscious, post-surgery, tubes everywhere. His vitals were stable. A nurse was adjusting his IV. Emily stood in the doorway and watched him breathe, in and out, steady, alive. She thought about his wife, 7 months pregnant, flying across an ocean right now to reach a husband who nearly didn't come home. A husband who would be there to hold his child, because a woman he barely knew crawled through open ground and ran back into a firefight and refused to leave without him. Emily put her hand on the doorframe and whispered, "Rest easy, kid. You earned it." Then she turned around and walked into a man's chest. Holt. He was standing in the hallway with 2 paper cups of coffee. He'd been waiting. She didn't know how long. I went to the mess hall, he said. Black. No sugar, like you asked. He held out the cup. It took me a while because I also went to the chaplain's office and asked him to add something to my statement. Emily took the coffee. What did you add? Holt's jaw worked. He looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then at her. I told him that on March 14th at approximately 2300 hours, I assaulted the most extraordinary soldier I've ever met. And I told him that I will spend the rest of my career trying to be worthy of the fact that she saved my life anyway. Emily held the coffee. The warmth seeped into her blood-stained fingers. She looked at Danny Holt, standing in a hospital hallway, stripped of everything that had made him cruel, rebuilt into something raw and real and humbled. Drink your coffee, Holt. Is that an order? Yeah, it is. He almost smiled. She almost smiled back. They stood in the hallway drinking terrible military coffee while monitors beeped behind closed doors, and the sun rose over a base that didn't know what had happened in the desert last night and wouldn't know for years. But 12 men knew, and one woman knew, and that was enough. Emily finished her coffee, crushed the cup, and tossed it in a trash can. Then she walked to the communications center, sat down at a secure terminal, and began writing the operational framework for a program that would change the way the United States military thought about combat medicine forever. She wrote for 6 hours straight, and the first line of the first page read, "In combat, the distinction between healer and warrior is artificial. The best soldiers are both. This program exists because 12 men almost died, proving that." 6 hours turned into 6 weeks. Emily wrote the operational framework, rewrote it, tore it apart, and rebuilt it 3 more times. She interviewed 47 combat medics from every branch. She reviewed 200 mission reports where medical personnel had been forced into combat roles without authorization. She studied every case where a medic had died because they weren't allowed to defend themselves. Every case where wounded soldiers had bled out because the person closest to them was trained to shoot but not to heal, or trained to heal but not to shoot. The pattern was always the same: 2 separate worlds, 2 separate skill sets, and a wall between them that got people killed. She was going to tear that wall down. SOCOM gave her an office at Fort Bragg, 4 walls, a desk, a secure phone, and a whiteboard that she filled within the first hour and erased and filled again every day for a month. She worked 16-hour days. She ate when she remembered. She slept when her body refused to stay upright. And every night before she closed her eyes, she called the medical ward at Landstuhl and asked about Dunlap. Week 1, he was still in intensive care. Infection had set in. They put him back in surgery. Emily sat in her office at 2 in the morning, phone pressed to her ear, listening to a nurse read vitals to her across an ocean. His temperature is still elevated. The surgeons are concerned about sepsis. What antibiotics is he on? Ma'am, I can't really discuss treatment details over. He's my soldier. Tell me what he's on, the nurse told her. Emily wrote it down and called an infectious disease specialist at Walter Reed, who she'd worked with during her second deployment. She woke him up. He didn't complain. He made 3 calls. By morning, Dunlap was on a different antibiotic protocol. Week 2, the fever broke. Dunlap woke up and asked for his wife. She'd been sleeping in a chair beside his bed for 9 days. She held his hand and told him he was going to be a father, and he cried so hard the nurses had to give him a sedative because his abdominal stitches were tearing. Emily got that report from the chaplain. She sat in her office and stared at the wall for 10 minutes. Then she went back to work. Week 4, Dunlap was transferred to Walter Reed for rehabilitation. Emily drove 3 hours to see him on a Sunday. She walked into his room and found him sitting up in bed, pale and thin but alive, his wife Sarah beside him with a belly that had grown visibly since the last photo Emily had seen. Dunlap saw Emily and his face did something complicated: joy and pain and gratitude and something else, something that looked like awe, all tangled together in the expression of a 23-year-old man who was still trying to understand what had happened to him. "There she is," he said. Emily pulled up a chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone shot me in the stomach and then a crazy woman dragged me across a desert." "That's a pretty accurate summary." Sarah leaned forward. She had dark eyes and a quiet intensity that reminded Emily of herself. "Lieutenant Carter, I've been wanting to meet you." "Emily, please." Sarah took Emily's hand in both of hers. Her grip was warm and fierce. "My husband told me what you did. All of it. Going back for him when you were ordered to leave. Carrying him to the helicopter. Keeping pressure on his wound for the entire flight." Her voice cracked, but she didn't let go. "I'm 31 weeks pregnant. In 9 weeks, my daughter is going to be born. And she's going to have a father because of you." Emily's chest tightened. She could face gunfire without flinching. She could crawl through kill zones without hesitation. But a pregnant woman holding her hand and thanking her for her husband's life was the thing that nearly broke her. "He would have done the same for me," Emily said. Dunlap shook his head. "I'd like to think so, but honestly, when I followed you out of that building, I wasn't being brave. I was just following the person who seemed to know what the hell she was doing. You made it easy to be brave, Carter. That's the thing nobody tells you about leadership. The best leaders don't ask people to be brave. They make bravery feel like the obvious choice." Emily stayed for 2 hours. She talked to Dunlap about his rehab. She talked to Sarah about the baby. She learned that they were naming her Grace. She learned that Dunlap had already submitted paperwork to return to active duty as soon as he was cleared. She told him he was insane. He told her he learned from the best. When she left, she sat in her car in the parking lot for 15 minutes before she could drive. Not because she was upset, because she was full. Full of something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Purpose that wasn't stolen. Purpose that was given. Week 6. The pilot program was ready for review. Emily stood in a conference room at SOCOM headquarters in Tampa, Florida, facing a panel of 8 senior officers, 3 generals, 2 admirals, 3 colonels, one of whom was David Mercer. She presented for 90 minutes without notes. She laid out the training pipeline, the selection criteria, the dual qualification standards, the rules of engagement modifications that would allow medics with combat backgrounds to transition between roles in real time based on tactical necessity. She presented case studies, statistics, cost analyses, and she presented the human element, the stories of medics who had watched soldiers die because they weren't allowed to fight, and soldiers who had watched medics die because they weren't trained to survive. When she finished, a 2-star general named Patterson leaned forward. He had the look of a man who had seen a lot of briefings and been impressed by very few. "Lieutenant Carter, this program fundamentally changes the relationship between medical and combat personnel. It blurs a line that the military has maintained for decades. The Geneva Convention has specific protections for medical personnel that are contingent on their non-combatant status. If your medics carry weapons and engage in combat, they lose those protections. How do you address that?" Emily didn't hesitate. "Sir, the protections you're referring to are meaningful in conventional warfare between state actors who respect international law. The operating environments our special operations forces face today do not involve state actors who respect international law. Our medics are already being targeted, already being shot at, already being killed. The protection is theoretical. The threat is real. This program doesn't remove a protection that exists. It provides a capability that's desperately needed." Patterson sat back. He looked at the admiral beside him. Something passed between them. A nod so slight that anyone who wasn't watching would have missed it. Mercer spoke next. "Lieutenant Carter, you designed this program based largely on your personal experience. Some would argue that's a narrow foundation for a systemic change. What would you say to that?" Emily looked at him. The man who had punished her, the man who had apologized, the man who was now testing her in front of the people who could make or break everything she'd built. "Sir, my experience is not narrow. It's specific. And specificity is exactly what this program needs. I've been on both sides of the line. I've been a shooter who needed a medic, and a medic who needed to shoot. I've stood in the exact gap this program is designed to fill. I didn't design it from theory. I designed it from the floor of a destroyed building with my hands covered in blood and my teammates dying around me. If that's a narrow foundation, then every building in America is standing on a narrow foundation because they're all built on the ground." The room was silent. Patterson looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "How soon can you have the first class operational?" 14 weeks from authorization, sir." "You'll have your authorization by end of week. Don't make me regret it." Emily saluted. "No, sir." She walked out of that conference room and her phone buzzed. A text from Holt. 4 words. "Did they approve it?" She typed back, "Yes." 3 seconds later, damn right they did. Then a second text, I want in. First class, don't you dare say no. Emily stared at the phone. Danny Holt, the man who had choked her on a helicopter, who had mocked her, belittled her, tried to break her before she even stepped off the aircraft. That man wanted to serve under her command. She typed back, selection starts in 6 weeks. No special treatment. Wouldn't expect any. And Holt, yeah, if you ever put your hands on another soldier, I will end your career myself. We clear? Crystal. Emily put the phone away and walked to her car. Halfway across the parking lot, she stopped. She stood still and looked up at the sky. Just for a second. Just long enough to feel the sun on her face and to breathe without the weight of someone else's expectations on her chest. Then she got in the car and drove to Fort Bragg to start building something that had never existed before. 14 weeks later, the first class assembled. 22 candidates, 12 men, 10 women, all of them combat medics, all of them weapons qualified, all of them volunteers who had been told exactly what the program demanded and had shown up anyway. Emily stood in front of them on a Monday morning. She wore clean fatigues and a calm expression and carried nothing in her hands, no clipboard, no notes, no podium between her and them. My name is Captain Emily Carter. The promotion had come through 3 weeks earlier. Mercer had hand-delivered the paperwork. He'd stood in her office and watched her pin the new rank on her collar, and he'd said, overdue, by about 3 years. It was the closest thing to warmth she'd ever heard from him. 12 weeks ago, Emily told the candidates, I was told that I couldn't be a soldier and a healer at the same time, that I had to choose, that the military didn't have a place for someone who could do both. I'm standing here today to tell you that place exists now. You're standing in it. She looked at their faces, young, determined, scared, exactly the way she'd looked at Ranger School a lifetime ago. This program will break you down and build you back up as something the United States military has never produced before. You will be trained to save a life and take a life in the same 60 seconds. You will be asked to make decisions that no regulation covers and no textbook prepares you for. And you will be trusted to know the difference between when to heal and when to fight. She paused. Some of you won't make it. That's not a failure. This program isn't for everyone. It's for the people who can't stop being both things at once, no matter how hard the world tries to force them to choose. If that's you, you're in the right place. She looked to the back of the formation. Holt was standing there. He'd made selection. Barely. He'd pushed his body to its absolute limit during the physical assessment, and during the psychological evaluation, when they'd asked him why he wanted to join a program led by the woman he'd once assaulted, he'd given an answer that the evaluators said was the most honest thing they'd heard in 20 years of assessments. He'd said, because she showed me what a real soldier looks like, and I need to become the kind of man who deserves to stand next to one. Emily didn't give him special treatment. She didn't give him extra scrutiny either. She treated him exactly the way she treated everyone else. Like a professional, like an equal, like someone worth investing in. And Holt responded by becoming the hardest working candidate in the class. First to arrive, last to leave. Never complained, never quit. The other candidates didn't know his history with Emily. They just knew he trained like a man possessed, and that whenever Emily demonstrated a technique or explained a concept, Holt listened with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Week 8 of training. Emily was supervising a live-fire medical exercise when her phone rang. She stepped away and answered. It was Sarah Dunlap. She's here, Sarah said, crying and laughing at the same time. Grace, born this morning, 6 pounds, 11 ounces. She's perfect. Michael is holding her right now, and he won't let go. Emily pressed the phone against her ear and closed her eyes. Tell him congratulations. He wants to talk to you. Hold on. Rustling, then Dunlap's voice, thick with tears. Carter. Dunlap, I hear you're a dad. I'm a dad, His voice broke on the word. I'm holding my daughter. She's so small. She's got Sarah's eyes and my nose, poor kid. Carter, I'm holding my daughter. I know. Because of you. I'm holding her because of you. Emily pressed her free hand against her chest. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. You're holding her because you fought to stay alive on that helicopter floor. Don't give me all the credit. I'm giving you all the credit and you can't stop me. Listen, Sarah and I talked about it. We want you to be her godmother. If that's something you'd be willing to do. Emily opened her eyes. She looked across the training ground at 22 candidates practicing under fire, learning to be the thing she'd always been, the thing the world had tried to erase from her. She looked at the program she'd built from nothing. She looked at the life she'd rebuilt from the ashes of the one they'd burned. I'd be honored, Dunlap. Michael, call me Michael. I'd be honored, Michael. She hung up. She stood there for 30 seconds. Then she walked back to the training ground and continued the exercise. 12 weeks later, 18 of the original 22 candidates graduated. Emily pinned their qualification badges herself. Each badge was a new design, approved by SOCOM, combining the medical caduceus with crossed rifles. Healer and warrior, unified. Holt was among the graduates. He stood at attention while Emily pinned the badge on his chest. Their eyes met. Neither of them said a word about the helicopter. Neither of them needed to. Everything that needed to be said had been said in the way he'd trained, the way he'd changed, the way he'd become the kind of soldier who lifted people up instead of pushing them down. Emily pressed the badge into the fabric over his heart and said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "You earned this." Holt's eyes glistened, his jaw locked. He nodded once. Emily stepped back and addressed the class for the final time. 11 months ago, I was called just a nurse by men who didn't know any better. I was told to sit down, stay quiet, and let others do the fighting. I was told that my job was to pick up the pieces after the battle, not to shape the battle itself. And I accepted that. For 2 years, I accepted it because I thought following the rules mattered more than following my instincts. She paused. Every eye in the formation was locked on her. I was wrong. Rules matter. Orders matter. The chain of command matters. But when following the rules means watching your people die, when following orders means choosing obedience over life, then you have a higher obligation. You have an obligation to the person bleeding out at your feet, to the teammate pinned down by fire, to the human being who needs you to be more than one thing in that moment. She looked across the formation. You are now qualified to be more than one thing. You are healers and you are warriors, and you carry both of those identities with equal weight. The world will try to make you choose. Don't. The world will try to put you in a box. Break it. And when someone tells you that you can't be both, you look them in the eye and you show them what both looks like. She saluted the class. They saluted back. The ceremony ended. 3 months later, Emily led her first mission as program commander. A hostage rescue, deep in hostile territory. Her team of dual qualified operators moved through the night like ghosts. They breached the target compound. They neutralized the threat. They extracted the hostage alive. And when one of the operators took a round to the shoulder during extraction, the medic next to him dropped his rifle, treated the wound in 45 seconds, picked his rifle back up, and continued fighting. No one had to choose. No one had to ask permission. No one died. Walker sent her a message that night, 2 sentences. Watched your AAR. That's how it's supposed to work. Ramos sent her a bottle of whiskey with a note that read, "For the ranger who saved my life and changed the game. Drink one for me. My wife says I'm not allowed." Mercer called her into his office one final time. He sat behind his desk the same way he always had, hands folded, face unreadable. But his eyes were different now. There was something in them that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Respect. Not the forced kind that rank demands. The real kind. The kind that is earned in blood, in fire, and choices that haunt you long after the shooting stops. The program is being expanded, Mercer said. SOCOM is funding 3 additional training cycles this year. The Joint Chiefs have requested a briefing. The Secretary of Defense mentioned it by name in a closed-door meeting last week. Emily sat across from him. Same chair, same room, different everything. You built something that's going to outlast both of us, Carter. Long after you and I are gone, soldiers are going to walk onto battlefields carrying medical kits and rifles and the training to use both. And they're going to live because of it. Their teammates are going to live because of it. Families are going to stay whole because of it. He stood up. She stood up. I have one more thing for you. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small box. He set it on the desk between them. Emily opened it. Inside was a silver star, the nation's 3rd highest award for valor in combat. For actions on the night of March 14th, Mercer said, for extraordinary gallantry under fire, for saving the lives of 11 United States Navy SEALs while serving in a capacity that exceeded your authorized role, approved by the Secretary of the Navy and endorsed by SOCOM Commanding General. Emily lifted the medal from the box. It was heavier than she expected. She held it in her palm and felt the weight of everything it represented. Not just one night, not just one fight, 15 years of service, 2 years of silence, a career destroyed and rebuilt. A moment in a dark compound when she reached for a rifle and chose people over rules. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. I'm the one who owes you. She walked out of his office. She walked across the base. She walked past the training ground where her next class of candidates was running drills. She walked to the motor pool parking lot, got in her car and sat there. She put the medal on the dashboard. She looked at it. Then she picked up her phone and pulled up a photograph that Sarah Dunlap had sent her 3 days ago. Baby Grace, 4 months old, asleep on Michael Dunlap's chest. Both of them breathing, both of them alive. Emily set the phone next to the medal, the silver star on one side, the photograph on the other. Valor and life, the warrior and the healer. She didn't have to choose anymore. Nobody would ever make her choose again. Emily Carter started the car, drove off the base, and headed toward the rest of her life. Not as a nurse, not as a soldier forced into silence, not as a woman who had to hide what she was to be allowed to exist. She drove forward as exactly who she had always been, a warrior who heals, a healer who fights, a leader who refuses to let anyone die while waiting for permission to save them. And somewhere in a hospital in Virginia, a baby named Grace slept peacefully on her father's chest, alive because one woman, on one night, in one crumbling building, made the choice that no one else would make. She picked up the rifle, and she turned the battle, and she never looked back.